What if the most powerful medicine on the planet wasn't sitting in a pharmacy, but sitting in a jar on your counter, quietly doing something your antibiotics can't? Most people have no idea that while the modern world was busy purifying, sterilizing, and processing its food supply into something shelf-stable and essentially dead, and entire civilizations were building their health on something completely different. Fermented foods. Foods that are alive. Foods loaded with billions of beneficial bacteria, good enzymes, organic acids, and bioactive compounds that science is only now beginning to fully understand. And here's what's stunning. Recent studies confirm that your gut is the control center for your entire body. It affects your mental health, skin, and how you fight off disease. If you take care of your gut, your overall health will naturally be in good condition. Today, I'm going to show you 20 fermented foods that could do exactly that. We're going from the familiar to the extraordinary. And by the time we get to number 20, you'll understand why traditional cultures that ate this way didn't have the epidemic rates of autoimmune disease, depression, high death rate, and chronic illness that are defining the modern world. Stick around because number 13 on this list is one most people have never even thought of as medicine. And the research on what it does to your metabolism is genuinely shocking. And number 17 is so effective that researchers are now calling it one of the most underrated cardiovascular foods ever discovered. If you want real food science delivered every week, hit subscribe right now. Let's get into it. Number 1. Sauerkraut, the probiotic that quietly kept empires standing. We begin here because sauerkraut is where most people first encounter fermentation, and where almost everyone makes the same mistake. They underestimate it entirely. The formula is almost insultingly simple. Cabbage, salt, thyme. That is the complete ingredient list. And yet the biological transformation that unfolds between those three elements is, by any serious measure, one of the most medically significant processes in all of food preparation. Lactobacillus bacteria, naturally resident on the outer leaves of raw cabbage, activate once submerged in the brine created by the salt drawing moisture from the vegetable. They consume the available sugars, generate lactic acid as their metabolic output, and in doing so, create an environment that is simultaneously hostile to harmful pathogens and profoundly hospitable to the human gut. Probiotic concentrations in a properly fermented batch can reach into the billions per serving. But raw probiotic volume is only part of the story. Unpasteurized sauerkraut carries a nutritional payload that goes well beyond bacteria. Vitamin C, historically in concentrations sufficient to prevent scurvy, which is precisely why German naval commanders provisioned their long voyage ships with barrels of it. Vitamin K2, critical for calcium metabolism and arterial health. Glucosinolates derived from the cabbage itself, compounds with documented anti-cancer activity in cellular and clinical research, and organic acids that directly address inflammation at the gut lining, the interface where so much of chronic disease originates. A landmark Stanford study confirmed something that reshuffled the scientific conversation. A diet rich in fermented foods increased microbiome diversity more powerfully and more consistently than even a high-fiber diet. The food that changes the gut the most is not the one with the most fiber. It is the one that is alive. One critical distinction that determines whether you are eating medicine or eating cabbage in a can. The sauerkraut that sits on a supermarket shelf at room temperature has been pasteurized. The heat that gave it shelf stability destroyed every living organism in it. The real product lives in the refrigerated section or in a glass jar on your counter, still actively fermenting. If it doesn't feel cold, if it doesn't produce a faint bubble when you open it, it is not doing what sauerkraut is supposed to do. Practical protocol: 2 to 4 tablespoons alongside a meal daily. And the brine, the cloudy, tangy liquid surrounding the cabbage, carries the same probiotic density as the kraut itself. Pour it over food. Drink it directly. Do not discard it. Number 2. Kimchi, the immune army assembled in an earthenware pot. Here is a medical paradox that researchers are still working to fully explain. South Korea carries one of the highest burdens of gastric cancer in the world and simultaneously produces some of the most diverse, robust, and resilient gut microbiomes ever cataloged in large-scale population studies. The reconciling variable, the factor that researchers keep returning to, is kimchi. Kimchi is fermented Napa cabbage and radish, layered with chili paste, garlic, ginger, and traditionally fermented fish sauce. What this creates is not simply a probiotic food. It is a probiotic delivery system engineered around one of the most synergistically anti-inflammatory spice matrices in culinary history. The fermentation generates a diverse community of lactobacillus strains, including Lactobacillus kimchii, a species essentially unique to this preparation and absent from most other fermented foods in the global catalog. Documented effects in published research include measurable improvements in immune modulation, LDL cholesterol reduction, insulin sensitivity, and the suppression of pro-inflammatory cytokine activity. But the true sophistication of kimchi lies in something the ancient Korean fermenters could never have articulated in biochemical terms and yet built instinctively into the recipe. The garlic. Garlic contains fructooligosaccharides, prebiotic compounds that function as food specifically for the lactobacillus strains being simultaneously delivered by the fermentation. Kimchi does not merely introduce beneficial bacteria to the gut. It introduces them with provisions for the journey. The bacteria arrive already fed. Practical protocol: a modest portion, several tablespoons, with every meal. In traditional households, multiple varieties of kimchi were always present simultaneously. The diversity of kimchi varieties on the table was considered as important as the quantity consumed. That intuition has since been validated by microbiome science. Number 3. Kefir, the ancient drink that makes commercial yogurt look like a rough draft. The word itself comes from the Turkish, a word meaning, approximately, to feel well. That etymology, across centuries and thousands of miles of geographic distance, tells you something about how deeply embedded the experience of this food's effect was in the cultures that discovered it. Kefir is produced by culturing milk, traditionally from cows, goats, or sheep, with kefir grains, not botanical grains, but dense symbiotic colonies of bacteria and wild yeast that resemble small, irregular heads of cauliflower. The result of this fermentation is a drink that contains between 20 and 60 distinct probiotic strains, depending on the grain culture and preparation conditions. Compare that to the 2 to 7 strains found in most commercial yogurt products. This is not a quantitative difference. It is a categorical one. Kefir and commercial yogurt are not the same class of food. What elevates kefir beyond simple probiotic volume is a property that most fermented dairy products cannot claim: colonization. Clinical research has demonstrated that kefir's bacterial strains do not simply transit through the digestive system. They establish. They take up residence. They alter the gut environment persistently, not temporarily. This is the difference between a tourist and an inhabitant. Documented clinical outcomes include the near elimination of lactose intolerance symptoms. The bacteria predigest the lactose during fermentation, making the dairy accessible to people who cannot tolerate it unfermented. Measurable reductions in IBS symptom severity, suppression of inflammatory biomarkers, and in animal model research demonstrated anti-tumor activity. The most compelling and perhaps most underappreciated body of kefir research concerns its relationship to the gut-brain axis, the bidirectional communication highway between your digestive system and your central nervous system. The serotonin-adjacent neurological pathways that kefir's microbiome activity appears to support are now being taken seriously as a genuine variable in mood regulation and psychological resilience. The Caucasian mountain communities of Georgia and Azerbaijan, among the most reliably long-lived populations in the entire ethnographic record, consumed kefir as a daily staple across generations. That longevity was not genetic fortune. It was built 1 cup at a time at the table. Practical protocol: 1 cup daily, consumed as a drink. Morning, on a reasonably empty stomach, maximizes gut contact time. Number 4. Kombucha, the living detox with biochemical scaffolding. Kombucha begins as something utterly ordinary, sweetened tea, and is transformed over 1 to 3 weeks of fermentation by SCOBY, a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, into something the body processes in an entirely different register. The fermentation pathway produces a specific constellation of organic acids, acetic acid and glucuronic acid most prominently, that carry real, measurable hepatic and detoxification significance. Glucuronic acid in particular functions as a binding agent. It attaches to fat-soluble toxins and metabolic waste products, neutralizes them, and escorts them out of the body through both the kidneys and the bile pathway. This is the precise biochemical mechanism underlying the traditional claim that kombucha cleanses the system. That claim, so often dismissed as folk medicine, turns out to have legitimate molecular architecture beneath it. Kombucha also generates B vitamins as fermentation byproducts, preserves and concentrates the polyphenol antioxidants from the base tea, and contributes a moderate probiotic presence, lower in bacterial volume than Kefir or unpasteurized sauerkraut, but distinct enough in its organic acid profile to occupy a therapeutic role that other fermented foods do not replicate. The critical consumer caveat. The commercial kombucha market is largely a performance of fermentation rather than the real thing. Many widely sold brands are pasteurized after fermentation, eliminating the live culture entirely. Many others carry sugar loads high enough to functionally undo the metabolic benefits of the fermentation process. The standard to look for: raw, unpasteurized, live cultures declared on the label, and sugar content at or below 5 grams per serving. If none of those criteria are met, you're drinking flavored carbonated water with a health food price tag. Practical protocol: 4 to 8 ounces before a meal, used as a targeted digestive primer. Not consumed freely throughout the day as a beverage substitute. The effect is purposeful and specific. Treated accordingly. Number 5. Traditional yogurt. The standard that everything else gets measured against, and almost nothing in the modern dairy aisle comes close to meeting. There is a version of yogurt that has existed for thousands of years, made from whole milk, fermented slowly for 12 to 24 hours, allowed to culture until the living organisms within it reach full biological maturity, then strained into something dense, concentrated, and alive. This is the yogurt that sustained pastoral communities across Anatolia, the Caucasus, and the ancient Fertile Crescent. It bears almost no resemblance to the sweetened, artificially thickened, fat-strip products occupying the refrigerated shelves of every modern grocery store. They share a name. They do not share a function. Authentic yogurt, built on cultures of Lactobacillus bulgaricus and Streptococcus thermophilus, and fermented long enough for those organisms to fully establish themselves, has a clinical record that most people are entirely unaware of. Randomized controlled trials confirm it measurably shortens the duration of infectious diarrhea. It restores gut flora after antibiotic treatment with a speed and completeness that probiotic capsules rarely match. It reduces the incidence of antibiotic-associated secondary infections by recolonizing the microbial terrain that pharmaceutical intervention strips bare. The fat deserves particular attention, because this is where the industrial food system made its most consequential error. Full-fat fermented dairy contains conjugated linoleic acid, a naturally occurring fatty acid with documented anti-inflammatory properties and measurable effects on body composition in clinical research. When manufacturers remove the fat to produce what they marketed as a healthier product, they remove precisely the compound that made the food most therapeutically valuable. The low-fat yogurt on your shelf is not a lighter version of real yogurt. Is it a graded one? Practical protocol: 1 cup daily, plain and full fat, without exception. The ancient Greek and Levantine tradition of straining yogurt into labna, a thick, almost cheese-like concentration, elevates both the protein content and the probiotic density per gram. Serve it as those cultures have always served it, with a generous pour of olive oil, coarse salt, and fresh herbs. That combination is not culinary tradition alone. It is, as we now understand, a synergistic delivery system. Coming up at number 6, a fermented paste from Japan that has been eaten daily for over a millennium, and that researchers, when they finally examined the cancer data from the populations consuming it, found to be associated with something they did not initially expect. That investigation changed how the scientific community thinks about fermented soy entirely. Number 6. Miso. 1,000 years of daily use, and the research is still catching up to what the practice already knew. The epidemiological anomaly that drew serious scientific attention to miso was this. Japanese populations consuming miso as a daily dietary staple showed lower rates of certain hormone-dependent cancers, breast cancer most consistently, even after researchers controlled for every other dietary and lifestyle variable they could isolate. The data was persistent. The association was real, and it led investigators directly into the biochemistry of what miso fermentation actually produces. Miso is constructed by combining soybeans, sometimes alongside rice or barley, with koji, a cultured mold designated Aspergillus oryzae, and allowing fermentation to proceed for periods ranging from several weeks to several years. The duration is consequential. Long-aged miso, which develops into the darkest, most complex varieties, is not simply more intense in flavor. It is more concentrated in its therapeutic payload. The koji-driven enzymatic breakdown that occurs over those extended fermentation periods transforms the original soybean into something biochemically unrecognizable from its starting state. What emerges is a food dense in active digestive enzymes, liberated amino acids in their most bioavailable form, B vitamins generated as fermentation byproducts, and isoflavones that the fermentation process has converted into molecular structures the body can absorb and utilize far more readily than those present in unfermented soy. The fermentation also degrades phytic acid, the mineral-blocking antinutrient naturally present in legumes, substantially increasing the bioavailability of zinc, iron, and magnesium from the same serving. Published research on miso specifically, not on soy broadly, a critical distinction that too many generalizations ignore, documents reductions in systemic inflammatory markers, meaningful enrichment of beneficial gut bacteria populations, and evidence of a protective effect on the gastric mucosa, the stomach lining. These are findings specific to the fermented form. Unfermented soy does not produce them. The preparation protocol embedded in traditional Japanese practice contains a detail of quiet biochemical significance that practitioners observed and preserved long before they could explain it. Miso is never boiled. It is dissolved into liquid that is hot but has been pulled from direct heat, because the temperature required to boil destroys the enzymatic activity that constitutes a significant portion of miso's therapeutic value. The traditional cook knew this through observation alone. The biochemist can now explain exactly why they were correct. Practical protocol. Miso soup made with quality dashi broth, consumed daily, traditionally as a morning meal before anything else. The enzymes reach an empty digestive tract first. That covers our first 6 fermented superfoods, ending with the incredible healing power of miso. But we're just getting started. The next 14 foods on our list are even more powerful, including a common kitchen staple that most people are eating completely wrong, and an ancient drink that acts like a reset button for your liver. I'm splitting this deep dive into 2 parts, so you have time to start adding these first 6 into your kitchen today. Part 2 is coming in just a few days, and you won't want to miss the number 1 food on our list. It's the most powerful probiotic ever discovered. If you found this helpful, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of this journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in part 2.